All right, welcome back to Tapped In. We are on episode number 4. Today we're talking about having difficult conversations. I'm sitting here with Benson Varghese, and my name is Anna Summersett, and we're the partners at Varghese Summersett. Welcome. Wakeman, one of our favorites, talks a lot about this in her book, Reality-Based Leadership. And we'll start with an agree or disagree. The hardest part about leadership isn't strategy. It's having conversations that you'd rather avoid.
I disagree, but that's mostly because I don't avoid conversations. I would rather have the conversation and get it over with than prolong whatever it is, the decision or the conversation.
So you don't default to walking out. You default to having the tough convo.
Well, I do have a limit to what I think is productive. As long as I think it's productive, I'll stay in the conversation. But I would rather perhaps walk away from a volatile situation and come back with a cooler mind than let emotion take over. I think part of being a leader is trying to set a good example and trying to keep your cool. And people look to you to set the tone. And I think that's important.
Do you think that you tend to remove yourself from what you would call a volatile situation because you're volatile or because the other person is volatile? Or is it the same rule for both?
I would say it's the same rule for both. I think as leaders, you have a lot of pressure and you have a lot of pressure you put on yourself, but also to get it right, which can lead to, beneath the surface, things are not as calm as they might appear to others. And I'll speak for myself. I have to keep that in check. I have to be aware of where my emotions are because me saying the wrong thing or getting heated has a very different implication than someone who perhaps is my junior losing their cool. So it's just that much more important.
Well, the impact is far greater, for sure, because of the rightly or wrongly the pedestal that a leader can be put on. When they're running an organization, you serve as an example. And to a certain degree, that can mean you're held to a higher and maybe should be different standard than people around you. Is that sometimes difficult to carry, in the sense of the burden it is to always keep your cool, always be the calm, collected person in the room, always say and do the right things. And if it's not, then do you think it should be?
There is a lot of added pressure. And I would say as entrepreneurs and as founders, we put a lot of this on ourselves, right? Just like I could have chosen to keep the firm at 10 attorneys plus the team to support them. We made a decision together to continue to grow. I added on to that, starting another company, which is Lawft, the legal software platform. And using Lawft as an example, I chose to be in this space where, particularly when you're beta testing, there are a lot of negative reports that come in. This isn't working the way it should be. But that's something I've chosen for myself. Just as founders, we choose to take on these things. So we're choosing this role, and we have to understand that comes with having a thicker skin. And no matter what people say, being able to take that in. So even if it's the 100th thing that's gone wrong with Lawft since inception, and you've tried your best to fix it, you have to have the grace of saying, thank you for your feedback and trying to improve that. As a law firm owner, you're going to always receive feedback from people who may see things differently. And there's a lot of value to that. But one of the things that I think being in the software space really crystallized for me is you want to hear everyone and you really want to understand their problems, but also understand their proposed solutions may not be the best solutions. But as a leader, you just take it all in and you then decide what's best for your firm. And just that openness to listening to problems, exploring them, and being able to set aside, hey, I'm not going to agree with all of this, but there's still value in listening and for me to hear from people who are on the front lines.
Yeah, it's interesting when you use the word grace in there. And I think I've brought this up before when we've had difficult conversations, and I'll speak for myself, where I'll react in a way that isn't productive. Some might call it assertive, aggressive, but I'll react in a way that isn't productive. And on the back end, I'll be frustrated that nobody in the room showed me grace in that situation. Because I think sometimes the lines are blurred between oh, well, you're a leader and we look up to you, and you set an example with, I'm also a human being, right? And I make mistakes too. And so what we've learned, and a shout out to our girl, Cy Wakeman, is a healthy amount of self-reflection into the only person you can change, which is, who is yourself. Because leadership really isn't about changing people. It's about calling them to greatness and helping them level up, which brings us into our kind of first segment of this episode, if you will, which is when leaders are in disagreement. And I know that the way our firm is structured, we have you as the managing partner, I'm, a co-founder, and then we have 3 division leads. But even beyond our 3 division leads that run, criminal law and family law and personal injury law divisions respectively, we also have, other kind of natural leaders in the firm, whether they be middle management or from a seniority experience standpoint. So keeping in mind all the leaders that we have, can you share a time that either you and I or we collectively with division leads have disagreed on a strategy?
Sure. Any number of decisions are up for debate. A perfect example would be, is right now the best time to add another attorney to one of our locations, or do we wait and see how the market either saturates or oversaturates kind of demanding that we bring in? So in other words, do you hire for your projected growth or your actual growth? We have disagreements about that, because even though we are aligned in the sense of we're all trying to get to the best place for the firm, there's always a question of what's the best use of your resources. And there are opinions on both sides of that are valid. The way we try to approach it is to say, we're going to take in all the information, we're going to discuss it together. And you and the division leads have allowed me the space to make a final decision based on all the input. And one of the things that I try to do, and that I think everyone values, is, again, this idea that we can all speak freely and give our opinion, and that opinion be valued. Because again, there is great value to your experience and your insight. And I have to be open to listening, even though ultimately there are going to be decision makers within your firm that have to make the final decision. And then once that decision is made, once again, you're all rowing in the same direction of let's get to success.
Yeah. I mean, and you said a few things there that I think we need to, kind of pick apart. And one of the things you said early on in your response was that you're going to gather all of the information and then make a decision from there. And Cy Wakeman talks about this extensively in her book about decisions should be based upon facts and not upon ego. So how do you go about separating the ego side or the opinion side of the conversation from the reality side of the conversation, which is really where the facts or the data or the metrics lie?
So I'm a fact finder. And so it's a little bit easier for me to detach myself from sometimes what I came in thinking was right, and being open to, well, this is what the data supports. And the people who, of course, can change my mind are the ones that can point to specifics as to, well, here's what the data is right now. So for example, going back to that idea of should we hire now or should we wait to hire, someone that comes to me and says, this is how many leads we got at that location, here are how many we turned down or referred out, here are how many we think were qualified, that's going to have a much bigger impact on me than just having this gut feel of, hey, I think that office location needs another person. Yeah.
And I mean, you mentioned you're a fact finder. I'm not, right? And I'm a high quick start. But you'll even find me in conversations really out of the necessity of getting to the best final decision, say, let me go run the numbers on that real quick, right? Like I'll come into a conversation, we'll be kind of bouncing around an idea, and I'll say, yeah, I hear that you guys are interested in another attorney. You have somebody picked out. Maybe you've already talked to them, but let me just kind of run some numbers real quick and just make sure that that's the best decision. And for me, I don't know that that comes from a place of being a high fact finder naturally. I think that's probably because I'm more risk averse than you are. And I want to make sure that before we step into another investment that we are sure-footed, which is a little bit counterintuitive when, with being a quick start. But whenever we're having these conversations and we're trying to delineate between opinions and ego versus facts and reality, have you ever caught yourself kind of getting wrapped up in like your preference? So has there been a situation where you thought, I'd really prefer this to be decided this way, but I'm faced with the evidence of or the information of that is probably not the best decision? How do you combat that?
Yeah, I mean, we're all human, right? I think there is a part of all of us that when we come in with an idea and we believe we're right, that we want to hold on to that belief. And you really have to make a conscious decision to say, I'm really going to be open to this. But again, we're all human. I don't represent to anyone that I'm perfect. But going back to this idea of how we've addressed leadership within the firm, we're hopefully by example showing that we're committed to always becoming better. And I'll have any conversation. And if you tell me, hey, Benson, you really haven't considered XYZ, my goal is to constantly improve as a leader, to be open to those things, just as we ask our leaders and those who hope to become leaders to always dedicate themselves to improving. So as long as I can commit myself to making the best effort, I feel pretty comfortable. It's not that I'm always going to agree with you, but that I'm always committed to listening and committed to growth.
It's almost reframing the question from what I want to see happen here, right, to what's the collective best interest of the firm. And if you have this foundational belief that you are only ever going to do what's best for the collective, right, what's best for the firm, does that help you then reframe like how you respond to when people give you their opinion about things? And you say everybody's opinion has some value, but it may be upsetting, right? It doesn't mean it's without consequence. So walk us through a little bit about how you reframe that in your head to be kind and be patient in your response.
You know, I heard something this week talking about the difference between empathy and compassion at a leadership level, and I thought it was a good point. Empathy is something that tends to decline in leaders, because if you really felt the pain everyone else was feeling at all times, you wouldn't be able to make decisions. Compassion, though, is understanding what they're going through and taking it into consideration. So absolutely, at the top, you're making decisions that inevitably won't make everyone happy. And of course, the larger we've grown, the more that's true, right? It's hard for me to make a decision, even let's say about rolling out a benefit. And in my mind, it's everyone's going to love this. It's a benefit for the firm. Well, there might be some people that see it differently, and you just have to be okay with that. How I try to reframe it is
like, I don't want that benefit. I'd rather have the money in my pocket.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, giving someone a gift that has tax consequences versus, hey, I would rather just have money and, not have to go sell this gift because I'd rather have the money. Absolutely. And that's a valid position. But at the top, you've got to make a decision that you can apply to everyone equally. And sometimes there is some thought that goes into it that may not make sense to a few people. So for example, if I'm the person who would rather have money than a gift, I might not be considering the fact that to the gift giver, the thought that went into picking something specific to me meant more than the actual dollar value, right? There's more to it than just what this is worth. So yes, there are decisions that you make that won't make everyone happy, but you are trying to look at this from what's in everyone's best interest.
Do you ever feel like when people give their opinion or their perspective on something that maybe, is confrontational with yours, that it's a personal challenge or affront to what you believe is a foundational truth that you're here to better the firm and the lives of everybody in it?
For me personally, I don't think any one thing in terms of feedback would ever really cause me concern or consternation. When something is presented that I interpret as they're really questioning where my heart is, or it seems to be an affront to this idea that we have always been dedicated to our people, I would say that is probably a weak point for me, and something that I've had to come to recognize, to say, even in that situation, you have to be able as a leader to listen to what's being said and not take it personally, right? We're all going to have that chink in the armor. And the sooner you can find your chink and understand what it is, the better you can be prepared for conversations, and just be aware, hey, if I know this could affect me a certain way, that I'm going to steel myself even more to be better.
Do we need like a secret signal? Like when something like that happens, I can be like, this is your weak point. Don't lose it. Well, I mean, and that self-reflection is great. And so knowing that is a weak point for you, which is when you feel someone is attacking your commitment to the firm, or the kind of selflessness of how you lead the firm. What do you do to kind of cut through that noise and find clarity in that moment? Is it walking out of the room? Is it just sitting back and listening? Is it engaging and asking questions and seeking clarity on what their perspective is? Like, how do you get to that place of serenity?
Well, first, it comes from reminding myself that it is my perception, right? That may not be at all what they're trying to communicate to me. And I have to understand that in that moment, there are emotions going through my mind, right? And so first recognizing that's happening within me, and what's happening within me is something that I can control.
And may not be reality.
Right? And so teaching myself to really listen, to be patient, and to accept feedback without the need for a response from me in that moment. Because yes, left to my own devices, I would probably feel like addressing it or walking out of the room. But I'm trying to improve and create this habit of just take it in and don't feel like a response is immediately necessary. And I think that could be applied to anything, business or personal, that as I've grown and become older, I've realized you can sometimes continue an argument just because you want to get the last word in, and you want to be the one who got it right. And maybe if you say it loud enough or often enough, or just don't listen to the other person, it feels like you won. But the reality is, if you can teach yourself to just don't worry about winning that back and forth, try to take in what's being said. And if necessary, when you have a cooler mind, come back to discuss it, or just take it in and figure out how you can improve from there.
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that kind of back and forth. Like if I say it enough or I say it last, like then I'm going to win. And I was thinking about this the other day, back when I used to try a lot of cases, and, you object and then they get to argue and then you argue and then and it really is supposed to be objection. Do you need to respond? Judge makes a decision. My objections would go back and forth for like 5, 6, 7 times because I just couldn't let the judge make a decision based on them saying the last thing. Well, and I look back on that and I just cringe, and realize how much weaker my point was because I said it 7 times.
Well, and I am sure in your mind, just as we all believe. I was young
and dumb. I was so naive.
In your mind, you thought, well, if I emphasize it to the judge one more time or a different way, the judge would get it.
Right.
And in hindsight, in probably all of our conversations, we would say, maybe on the third volley, we had made our point.
Right. Well, and it's something I've really learned a lot from you. I mean, I think when we were dating and getting engaged and beginning our lives together as husband and wife, a lot of it, I was listening in our conversations to respond. And I would just formulate these brilliant arguments. I'm like, oh, I'm going to get him. He doesn't even know it. But you were still talking, right? And because I was formulating a response, I wasn't listening to you. And a lot of times I'd respond and you'd be so far past like what we're talking about onto another issue or another context of something. And I would just miss it. And I'd lose those arguments. And I had to kind of reevaluate how I'm listening and how I'm communicating. And now so much more so, I think when I'm faced with something that offends me or something that I take personally or something I disagree with, I do way more stopping, asking questions, right? repeating back what somebody has said to me, especially if it's something that's offensive, just take a few seconds, repeat it back. And it gives them a chance to hear their words again. And they get to make a decision. Do I want to stand by what I just said, or do I want to apologize and move on? Right. And I'm quick to forgive. Truly, truly, truly. Like I want to resolve the conflict and move on completely. But other people aren't always that way. And so when you talked a little bit earlier about you'd rather just have the hard conversation and move on, what do you do when the person you're in conflict with isn't interested in immediate resolution?
Yeah, that's tough. But I'm of the opinion that resolution requires movement from both sides. And so I can't accelerate, at least in my mind, I can't accelerate when, let's just use you as an example. I can't accelerate when you're going to be ready for that conversation. All I can do is say, I'm ready to have the conversation whenever you are, and hope that signals to you that the ball's in your court and that we should have this conversation. And so certainly living with, something that hasn't been resolved is difficult. It's not the way I'd like to operate. But by the same token, I think I would be doing more of a disservice to say, hey, Anna, we've got to sit down today and we've got to hash this out today, because you may not be in the right mindset yet. And sometimes, just like I said, I might need time to think about and evaluate how I'm going to respond. Other people might need that same space, and I've got to give them that space.
Well, certainly, in your personal relationships, you may have a longer leash there, right? You may not have the boundaries, put up. But on the business side, when you're tying money, stability, all of these things to a drama-free workplace, how do you give somebody that much rope? Do you not think that there need to be a certain temporal boundary to a conflict?
No, absolutely. So imagine you and your paralegal are in conflict.
I don't have a paralegal, but okay.
If you don't resolve the conflict, then one, it could fester. Two, it's going to affect productivity, right? Even if you're both of the mindset that I can come into work tomorrow and make everything look good and no one's going to look at us funny like we're not talking to each other, you both know there's a conflict that's unresolved. And it does affect your work, right? And if you're there to achieve a common goal, to give the best service to the client, to make the most of the time that you have there, to not have to spend unnecessary hours at work, then you're doing yourself a disservice by not addressing it, right? And so your timeline is different. And hopefully, again, both sides can see that and work through the problem. We're always, both through Cy Wakeman's books, through trainings, we're always focused on having and maintaining a drama-free environment. That's something we've really dedicated ourselves to. We'll talk about it all the way from the interview through, annual training, sometimes more than one. But it takes effort. It is not let's talk about it once. It's constantly something you have to dedicate yourself to.
Well, and it's interesting you said that conflict can really breed underperformance, right? Because you're just not going to you're not going to have the productive day that you normally would. Your mind's occupied elsewhere. You're replaying conversations in your head. You're avoiding answering the phone because you don't want to talk to the person you're in conflict with. Maybe subconsciously as support staff, you're, disregarding some things that the attorney wants done because you're just mad at them that day. So to an extent, drama does breed underperformance. On the same side, though, underperformance can breed drama. So I want to talk a little bit about what happens when somebody on the team is not performing to the expectations that you have set, and what do you do about it? So do you buy into Cy Wakeman's idea that coaching is really calling people to be great?
Yeah, absolutely.
And why is that? Like, what do you think about that is helpful?
Well, I'll start with, we have put a lot of time and effort into getting the right people here. And so I believe that people that we have want to be here, want to do great work by our clients. And calling them to greatness means whatever it is that brought you here, I want to give you the platform, the space, the resources to maximize that. And I want to take away the things that could detract from that. So workplace trauma is absolutely one of them. And the time and effort that we put into avoiding those things or quashing those things makes a massive difference in workplace performance. You could simplify it to one question: are you happy to come into work? Right? Because I've been in a place where I sat in my car for 5 minutes before I went into the building because I didn't want to be there anymore. I never want that for an employee here. I never want that for a team member here. And so what are we doing collectively? It's not just about the efforts that you or I or the division leads make. It's everyone has to be on board with this idea that we're going to work through our problems. We're going to talk to each other about our problems. And we talk to one another with the fundamental belief that we're all trying to get to the same place. Great service, great to each other, and a firm that's growing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we talk about underperformance, as leaders, you first have to start with a very clear expectation as to what performance is at your firm. And it could be different across the board, right? Like what may be, a solid performance for you may be very different than the lawyer who's 2 blocks down, may be very different from the lawyer who's 5 miles away. Everybody gets to run their business as they see fit. But I think first setting the clear expectations as to what performing at a high level looks like what being an A player looks like. And then when you find somebody who's not hitting those KPIs or metrics that you've laid out or expectations, approaching them in a way that is non-judgmental. Like, I'm not judging you, right? And I want to help scale you up. And you talked a little bit about providing the tools and resources to kind of level people up to what the firm's expectations of them. But is there a line, relatively fine line, between giving people the tools they need to level up and enabling the drama they're creating by being underperformers? Like, where do you decide, I've helped too much, like I'm really just enabling you to continue what you're doing?
As we talk about performance within the firm, one of the things that we talk about, I would say somewhat regularly, particularly at your annual reviews, is this idea that you are your own competition. And I say that and I remind people of that because otherwise, from the outside looking in, there's a temptation to take any role and grade everyone in that role the same way. But that's not really the case. I might have a case manager that's been a case manager for a year. I might have a case manager that's been a case manager for 5 years. What I expect of each of them is very different. So the number of demands they got out as just a metric might be very different. So it's not a question of, for this role, is the metric the same for everyone? It is based on your role and your experience. We have customized what good looks like and what great looks like. And we as leaders have to be clear with each individual about what we expect of them. That's, without that starting point, nothing else is fair. But letting them know you're only graded against yourself. And we've had a conversation either at you just got hired and it's your 90-day review. Here's what we expect for you for the rest of the year, or your annual review. And we're talking about what to expect for the next year. You have clear expectations about what we expect of you. And then we have an obligation as leaders to be transparent about whether or not people are hitting those goals. And that could be through conversations. It could be conversations with their division leads. It could be information that they're able to see in Lawft themselves, so they always know against different metrics how they're performing. But clarity is kindness, and transparency in the process. No one should get to December and then look up and say, what am I being graded on for this year? You need to go into the year knowing, here's what I hope to achieve. So when you have someone who you see is not hitting the metrics that you have both discussed, then you owe them a conversation about where they're falling short. And part of the conversation is trying to understand why they're falling short. Is there an external factor? Is there an internal factor? Is there something we're not providing? And we need to see if we can get them back on course. And we generally do that with a personalized plan for them that might be 30, 60, or 90 days. And again, it's very clear. Here's what we're trying to achieve. We're going to give you an opportunity and the resources to achieve it. We're going to come back and talk every 30 days at least to see if you're hitting those goals. And if they are not, then you need to evaluate as a leader whether or not they belong in that position. And that, of course, is a bifurcated question. Does that mean they're a good fit for your firm and you have another place you could put them? Or is this a position that you can no longer keep open for them and it turns out there's not another spot for them? Which is difficult, right? It's easy when the person's not a good culture fit and they're not performing. It's much harder when you like the person. They, in fact, might be a culture fit, but you just don't have a place for their talents. And one of the things we will tell people who are leaving our firm with notice or because we made a decision that they're not a good fit here is if you're leaving us on good terms, we'll help you try to get your next job. Just because you are not a fit for the role or for our firm doesn't mean you're not going to excel somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, in response to that, to quote Sai, reality is always the kind thing to do, right? That is kindness when you're saying you're not a fit here, because when you know that, they have known that for a long time. And it is best to release them and send them off to a place where they can really thrive and grow. So we'll get to letting people go, in a minute, but something you said in that response was that you're only in competition with yourself. And I understand why you're saying that. And one of the things that Sai talks about is when you come into conflict with an underperformer and you've given them the tools and resources, one of the questions she always asks is if you were in this role, right, facing this issue, what does great look like to you? And I think sometimes when we ask that question, we're really surprised by the answer because their concept or definition of what great looks like is very different than what our concept of great looks like. And I think therein lies the problem, right? If you haven't set a clear expectation for what great looks like for that individual or the collective of the team, then how can you expect them to rise to that level? So I think that's just an important, clarification in terms of how to really hear from people when you're thinking there's a performance issue and make sure it's not an expectation setting issue that
Right.
you're having. So you kind of naturally started talking about when you have underperformers or you have drama in the workplace, you have somebody who's not a culture fit, how do you go through the process of really cutting ties? And you had mentioned that when people no longer work here, leaving on good terms, that you fully support what their career path looks like going forward. And that just because they're not a fit here doesn't mean they're not a fit for someone else. So at what point do you think, though, you recognize that this isn't a performance issue, right? This is a mix match in culture fit for us. And that's something that I know you've never tolerated. How do you determine when that is?
To me, being a culture fit is really based on this idea that we are rowing in the same direction. If we somehow hire someone that makes it through our intense hiring funnel and they're showing us that they're not rowing in the same direction, they're not a team player, they're not interested in pulling their weight, or they're dedicated to bringing in drama when we've dedicated ourselves to being a drama-free environment. Those things tell me that we have a problem that I'm really not going to be able to fix. If you come to me with a strong desire to learn and you show competence, not even excellence, but competence in your area, then I can work with that, right? If there's a true mismatch of your talent or your competence, then we'll have that conversation of, hey, I don't think this is a good fit. In those situations, we have contemplated, is there a better role for this person? And even gone as far as saying, can we create a role for this person that would fit their skills? But those are hard decisions to make because we put a lot of effort into finding the right people, but you've got to make them, right? Part of the reason is because of the message it sends everyone else, right? If you're going to tolerate people who are not aligned with your values, and they've demonstrated that through their actions, then keeping them would be a great deterrent to everyone else. and it would kill morale.
Well, and one of the things that you were just talking about, with regard to the question was really, when do you know? Like, when does that point come for you? And I'll answer for myself, because I understand it's a difficult question when you really have to think through it. For me, it's when I hear somebody's name, oh, they want to talk to you, or I'm looking at data and I see somebody's name pop up and I'm just like, I just don't want to hear it, right? I just don't want to talk to them. I don't want to hear it. Like, I'm exhausted by the idea of working through yet another issue with this person. And that has nothing to do with their competency. It has nothing to do with, their ability as legal staff or in some other area at the firm. It's just the drama is exhausting. And Sai talks a little bit about how much time we waste in the drama. And it's like 2.5 hours a day on average, which when you put that out on a billable, rate over the course of a year is a lot of money, especially when you're talking about the size of a firm. And that's not just money you're losing, that's money that they're losing, right? Because the more revenue the firm has, the more benefits, the more pay, that everybody gets to level up. And so I think for me, it's just when I get to that point when I recognize I don't like this anymore. I don't want to work with this person. And again, it's not about competence. It's become exhausting because it's so filled with drama.
Yeah, certainly the emotional cost of a person can outweigh even top performance. And we've had to let at least one person go who was a good performer, but brought so much drama and baggage that was causing a distraction to themselves and others at the firm that it wouldn't work out. And we had to make that decision. So yes, the emotional cost is something that as a leader, you're aware of, but as any member of any firm, you should be asking yourself, am I becoming emotionally costly? And it's not this idea that I had to ask 5 questions or even the same question 5 times. It's a question of, am I draining people through how I act or my lack of performance or sometimes lack of showing up altogether? When you are not reliable or dependable.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned earlier too that if somebody's competent and they're a good culture fit, that you can work with that. And I know that doesn't mean like you're okay working with like the basic level of competence. Like, you have exceptional lawyers, exceptional staff. But I think what you're saying is that at a minimum competency level, as long as they are a good culture fit, they're trainable. They can be self-taught. They can be motivated. And you can teach people to do really incredible things, especially when you've got a team, with so much experience. Like, the mentorship opportunities are there as long as somebody's willing to learn.
Agreed. Competency has a lot of facets. I remember we had an employee that did not work out, who was a very good person, someone we all liked, and was competent in the sense that this person could learn things, but the role they were in and any role we could envision for them required attention to detail. And what we learned was this person was not good at multitasking. And anytime they were faced with having to do more than one thing, which at a law firm is always,
like all the time.
They could not pay attention to detail. So to me, that is a competency issue. That's not a knock on them. It just means they weren't a good fit for us in the roles that we needed. It does not mean at all that they won't thrive elsewhere in a different role. So that's a perfect example of there are certain competencies that a person needs, right? And if they have those and they have a desire to improve themselves and they will dedicate themselves to doing what it takes, then we'll find a place for them if at all possible. And we have.
Well, and so do you think overall you're more tolerant of underperformance or lack of culture fit?
Lack of culture fit to me is so close to the immediate make or break, which is honesty, that those are things that I will have to let people go for quickly. If there's an issue with honesty or integrity, it's an immediate, I don't care where you are. I don't like to do this, but I've even fired someone over the phone. I just called them and said, you don't need to come back, because it was an issue of honesty. Lack of culture fit is a pretty close second. Underperformance, I will try to work with people to see if we can get to where we need to be.
So as we kind of wrap up, what is kind of a somber episode talking about difficult conversations
It has been serious.
and ending with firing people, really just, we call it cutting ties because you're letting somebody go to flourish somewhere else. But, as we wrap up the difficult conversation about difficult conversations, do you really believe that hard conversations aren't cruel, that they're kind?
Yeah, certainly. I think having the difficult conversations will get you where you need to be. And that might be forward progress. It might be cutting ties, but there are conversations that need to be had. And being candid, radical candor, another subject that we're very interested in and dedicated to. All these things are what it takes to keep the firm going in the direction it needs to go.
And just to expand that for 1 second, I think that part of that is the timeliness of that clarity, right? Which is just have the difficult conversations, yes. Have them timely, right? Because as you discussed earlier, otherwise it festers and can kind of steamroll out of control. But that's it for today on the Tapped In podcast, episode 4, Difficult Conversations.
Episode 5 will be full of levity and joy and laughter.
Super fun. Thank you, Benson.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.